Thank you so much to Isabella for kicking us off. She's always so sweet. My name is Sualeha, and I'm really excited to highlight Emily today. I know today we did a lot of advocacy and talked to legislators, and I think it's a really great way to close off by talking about the power that media has, specifically when it comes to social change. So Emily, if you could kick us off and tell us about your journey in Cripple Media. Specifically, I would also really love to hear about the name and how you chose to reclaim Cripple as it comes to your own publication and work in media.
Yeah, of course. Okay. So, thank you so much, Molly. Okay. I see. Okay. Can everyone hear me? Okay, there it goes. Okay, so first off, I just want to say thank you guys so much for coming to hear me and hear a little bit about Cripple Media. I'm just so excited to meet you guys and speak with you. So my name is Emily Flores. I am the founder and editor-in-chief of Cripple. And a little bit about our story is, so I founded Cripple when I was 15 years old because I started working in journalism from a pretty young age. I was about 14 when I kind of started to do freelance writing, and even when I started to get more into the media industry and kind of the journalism industry as a whole, I just realized just how much of a huge underrepresentation and just a lack of representation in general that there was of young disabled people and of disability in the media. I felt that there were a lot of the majority of stories about young disabled people in the media were largely just just about making disabled people and our lives seem like it was something sad, something to be pitied against, something that was tragic. And I really felt these narratives were extremely just one-dimensional. I felt all of the young people that I was meeting, all of the young disabled people that I was meeting as a reporter, and that I was making these friends, I felt our lives weren't like this, to be honest. I pretty much just spent a lot of my nights as a 14-year-old eating Cheez-Its and binging Netflix. So it really didn't feel like that. And so I felt a lot of it was untrue and not false. And our lives were so much more multidimensional. And so basically this was something that I really felt was important, but I felt okay, how can we really start to change this? And how can we really start to make an impact? And so I thought, okay, by reporting stories, by really taking an issue and reporting it and putting it through my lens, putting it through the lens of a young disabled person, I thought, okay, that could be really impactful. But then how do I duplicate that? How do I multiply that by hopefully tens and hundreds of young disabled people? And so I thought, why not create an online platform like Cripple Media, where we can gather hundreds and tons of young disabled people worldwide, and so that we can really, really, put young disabled people into positions of power and multiply that power and really try to change the narrative and place it back into our hands. So we started in 2018. And as far as for our name, so that's kind of, I definitely wanted to talk about that. It's always, I think, it's always definitely, I think, a little bit of kind of a shocker. And so pretty much the reason why we chose to name our platform Cripple is because it kind of was twofold. One was because, the first reason was we really wanted to, because the platform was so, linked with the disability community, we really wanted to further the community's work in reclaiming the word cripple. Cripple has been a slur historically, it has been a slur since as long as I can remember. It has been kind of a word that has been used to discriminate against disabled people, against most commonly physically disabled people, but also kind of disabled people in general. And so ultimately, within the last couple of decades, the disability community has chosen to reclaim the slur cripple and to kind of, take it back and take back our power with it, and really just show the general society that this is we recognize the historical context that exists behind the word, and kind of reclaim it. And so that was kind of like the first line of thinking as to why we chose it. And second of all, I think our main reason why we chose it was also when we were creating Cripple, I think that we really wanted to create a platform that felt true and felt really honest about the disability community. Because something that I felt really strongly about was, kind of growing up, I saw lots and lots of spaces like for young disabled people, kind of like events that were created, by charities or created by, hospitals that were for young disabled kids. But largely I felt like, those spaces didn't really feel authentic to me. They didn't feel true to me. And it was largely because a lot of the time those events are created and led by non-disabled people. And so later I found out that was where kind of like the disconnect was coming from. And so anyway, so when I was kind of like, remembering about those events and like those current spaces that exist for young disabled people, I really wanted to make sure that Cripple was a place where it felt true and honest and absolutely connected to the disability community. And I thought, what better way than to kind of choose a word that currently represents like the disability rights movement and as to what they're moving towards. And also as well, I guess I should have said like 3 reasons, but the last reason was also to kind of like to kind of catch people's attention. There definitely was a little bit of shock value in it. I think that like when somebody who isn't really familiar with the disability community, I think that whenever they see Cripple, it's like, oh my gosh, like who would name a platform for disability Cripple Media? Like that sounds so heinous, that sounds horrible. But I think that like for a lot of people who, may have that reaction, I really hope that would, kind of like be an invitation to, learn more about the disability community, learn more about like our history and what we're all about. And I think that hopefully that would invite more people to kind of be like, okay, like what is this about? Like what are they doing? And so yeah, so I think that was kind of, the reason as to why we chose the name, and kind of like we just really wanted to kind of really connect with the disability community and at the same time, catch people's attention.
Yeah, I love all of their views. And I was going to say, I think one thing that really stood out to me when I was talking to Emily was just really resonating with this idea that we come from like populations that are really invisible in positions of like authority or power or representation. And I think for us, we really saw that in the bills that we advocated today, whether it was maternal Medicaid, like tampon tax. And again, I would really just like love to hear your perspective on that, on how representation has been that important to you, like how you would define it, and how that really encompasses your work with Cripple Media.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so yeah, I mean, I think for me personally, like kind of like growing up, I think that representation kind of like played a huge role in the way that I grew up. When I was younger, I became really, really attached to like pop culture, movies, films, and like TV shows. Like I really loved, like, well, first of all, I like really loved One Direction, so there's that. And I don't know, I just like really, really became attached to like pop culture and everything. And so I think something that later I really found out what was impacting the way that I perceived myself and the way that I perceived other young disabled people and the disability community as a whole was kind of not seeing myself in TV or books or films, because I think largely a lot of like the media that was out there at the time, it was kind of like stories that like, not to knock on this book. I personally, I was the first one in line to get this book, but The Fault in Our Stars, a lot of books like that that were largely kind of like about disability, kind of painted disability in a way that was like tragic and really sad and like very, and yeah, just kind of evoked feelings of pity. And so I think when I saw stories about me that were about that, it didn't feel, true. And in turn, I kind of saw, I think that kind of helped, sow the seeds of internalized ableism. It helped sow the seeds of like the way that I viewed myself, and made me feel like, maybe these stories about me are true, and the way that I interact with the world, and et cetera, et cetera. And so yeah, representation really was a huge way, the way that I grew up. And so later, that was kind of really kind of a pivotal moment as to when I grew up, that I really realized that this was extremely impactful and it really needed to change, and was one of the main reasons why I created Cripple. And yeah, I just think that like it was huge. And as I started to talk more and more with young disabled people, and the way that we connected, we pretty much all felt the same way. However, I will say that, as we've kind of like grown Cripple, and as we've kind of like, furthered our work and everything, we have pretty much mostly focused our work in like reporting and content creating, and making sure, that young disabled people are in positions of power in creating our own content. But the reason why we also think that representation is so incredibly impactful is not only because of the way that like it really puts us like we are growing up with it, and it kind of impacts the way that we perceive ourselves, but it also directly impacts the way that other people think about disability. And what I mean by that is that I think that like, whenever somebody kind of like watches a movie, like, I don't know if you guys have ever watched like Me Before You, that's another example. That movie was extremely kind of like painted disability in a negative light. All sorts of like stories like that. I think that one thing about like American pop culture is that I think I wasn't alone in being attached to pop culture. I think that one thing about kind of American culture in general is that our pop culture is pretty much our bread and butter. Like, the way that we consume media pretty much dictates the way that we perceive other people and the way that we make judgments about them. And so one thing that I started to learn about like our work at Cripple is that it was so incredibly impactful to start changing the way that we perceived disability, the way that we created honest representation about disability, because the more that people started to understand that, disabled lives weren't to be pitied and aren't, tragic or sad, that then creates a direct link in, helping create legislative change. That then creates, more of an ability for people to understand disability in an honest light and see our lives as more multidimensional, and, really understand that, that our lives are so much more than kind of, to be competed against. So,
yeah, I love that answer, and again, I think it aligns really well with what we've done today and what the point of our legislative advocacy day was. Something I just wanted to hit back on was, what are some of the legislative acts that you personally have been affected by or would love to see change in the coming years?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that the reason why I say that representation is so important is, because of that point that we really need legislative change now, because at the end of the day, representation isn't enough. It really isn't enough. What we need is change. Because every day about 27 mobility aids are being broken by airlines every day. We disabled people at the current state that we are now, we do not have marriage equality because of the way that if disabled people do get married, they are at risk of losing essential benefits and coverage, and so there are just so many issues like that that are kind of like impacting our community. They are real issues that are impacting us every day. And so, which is why I kind of feel like representation really isn't enough. And yeah, obviously it would be amazing to have more representation of young disabled people in media. But, what we really need is that. And I think that, however, as we create more and more representation, then we are able to create more legislative change. But But yeah, I think that a lot of people aren't aware of these issues that disabled people go through, like kind of, their mobility aids being injured or broken, or that there's like pretty much a national shortage of caregivers at the way that we are right now. I think a lot of people aren't aware of that because of the lack of awareness that there is of, the disability community and the way that the issues that we have every day.
Yeah, and something I really want to emphasize that Emily just said was that representation isn't enough. I know we talk a lot about like numbers of people that are from this population or like imagery about seeing people who look like us, and again, I think all of that is really important, but I think something else we really need to consider and talk about is what are those outcomes of those people that are serving in those positions. And like Emily was talking about, the current gaps in legislation, whether it's for the disabled community or for women, we really need to focus on that and how that is really the true purpose of representation and having people from our populations serve in positions of power. And something else I wanted to touch back on is how you were talking about how influential media is to our everyday lives. And something that I was thinking about is like, what is our role as people who consume media every day? And you're talking about how there are a lot of harmful side effects of having like really biased or inaccurate representations of people from different types of populations. So I would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that there is absolutely like kind of like the negative side effects of like of untrue representation or a lack of representation of disabled people in the media. I think is kind of like, I think when I was growing up, I think that when I kind of like digested like media like that, and when I digested kind of like even like when I started to work as a journalist, like I just saw like almost the majority of news pieces that I was seeing that were about disability and that were supposed to be, covering issues of disability, they were largely painting kids like me as, something that was to be pitied against. I mean, on Facebook, if you're bound to kind of like find a news piece that's like, oh, like this one disabled kid was like asked out to prom, and you see like the, hundreds of care reacts and and love reacts to those posts like that. But at the same time, I think it's like also important to kind of recognize like how harmful those, news pieces are, because it kind of, perpetuates a, untrue representation of disability, which is that, our lives are not to be pitied. And so that is something that, was incredibly harmful to kind of, I think, really digest, because it's like, that is what, the, general society kind of like thinks about disability. And I think that then kind of impacted the way that I, the way that I communicated with the disability community, the way that I perceived other disabled people as well. And so again, that also can impact the way that, non-disabled people view disability, the way that we interact with politics, and etc. And so another reason why we thought that was so important was because of that. And at Cripple, one of the other things that we did, besides reporting and stuff like that, we also put young disabled people in positions where we can create our own content. So whether that be like through TikToks, through YouTube videos, through memes, stuff like that. I think that also kind of gives us the agency to kind of like take it back and be able to produce content that does feel right and honest to the disability community. And even, things like that are, incredibly make a difference, because I think the more that we increase, creators with disabilities on social media, like on applications like TikTok or Instagram, that creates, more visibility and more diversity on people's feeds.
And I think that was a really great transition into talking about like influencers. And something else I was reflecting on was when it comes to like women specifically, like I've talked to a lot of my guy friends, and I'll ask them like who their role models are. And they'll usually always like list guys, and if I ask them like, do you have any female role models, the only people they can ever come up with like are their mothers, which of course is like amazing, we should support our mothers. But if you ask like young women, they'll usually be able to list at least like one or two women that they look up to. So I think highlighting this point of like who are the people that we like view as role models, so people that we can accept as like authority figures, people that we can accept as people that we want to be influenced like why it was so important to have people from Cripple Media like have ownership over the content that they create, because like through content creation they have like ownership over their narratives, and like they have the opportunity to be influencers in media and different avenues of social media.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think that that's a great example. I think that like the way that you know, how incredibly important it is to even have like, you know, diverse creators. I think that like, you know, when we start to think about like how, like, you know, like what was, you know, the last disabled creator that you've seen, I think it would be kind of like hard to think about like, you know, the answer for that. And I think that, like the more that we really try to, you know, push disabled creators onto like mainstream media, I think that you know, also helps, you know, for people to become more aware to the disability community and more aware to, you know, what we really are about, and less attached to kind of like the already like manufactured ableist notions that we have been fed by legacy and by mainstream media. And so I think that is another like really great avenue of kind of like taking back our power, which is, you know, through social media, because it's like we're able to create our own media. And I think that also too, like even for me, or even for like a person who is not a creator of media, I think that also like it also gives like regular everyday people like the ability to be able to, you know, support and be able to kind of I guess like support that cause by really being intentional of the media that they're consuming, and therefore supporting more diverse creators, supporting more, you know, seeking out for more, you know, disabled content creators, whether that be like on TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, etc. You know, really, you know, seeking them out and making sure, you know, that their feeds are diverse, and, you know, really, you know, diversifying their the way that they consume content.
As someone who like runs a form of media myself, again, I run a podcast. If you look at the statistics, only 24% of like the top podcasts are run by women, which is crazy to me. I mean, like we should be in those spaces, whether it's media, politics, economics, like whatever the space is. It doesn't really make sense to have disparity. So it really just makes me question like what types of people does the general population look to for like information, for perspectives, for opinions. Who do they look to inform themselves, and again, from their own perspective on the world. And something else I wanted to hit on for, along with what Emily was saying earlier, as I know we talked about how Emily started Cripple Media at a really young age, like 15. That's like high school freshman. It's sort of crazy to think about how you've been able to accomplish so much while still being a young person. And I know sometimes, like when we hear about like these ages, like oh, like you're only a high school senior, like you're only a high school freshman. It can seem like really intimidating to see yourself in that position. So I sort of wanted to like break that down and not make that seem like something that's like intimidating or like out of reach for like anyone that's in this room. So I wanted to hear your perspective on like what advice would you give to like young people who feel like change is like sort of out of their capacity.
Yes, absolutely, and I feel so strongly about that, because I think that when you're a teenager, you really feel like, you know, a lot of the time, especially in this generation, like I feel like a lot of like the older generation really does not want for young people to have agency, especially for teenage girls. I think that is definitely true. But yeah, I think that like I felt that when I was younger, I was extremely like inspired by our generation, by Gen Z. And I think that we are at a unique position in which that I feel like we're the only like generation that's kind of really grown up with technology. Like we really when we were born, we weren't exactly like born with like, you know, like kind of like babies like right now that like grow up with like iPads, but we did grow up as the internet evolved. And I think that really put us at a unique position, because we really grew up along with the internet, and therefore we became digital natives. And so I think that kind of put us at a really unique position in which we're able to kind of like use the internet and social media and be able to use it to our advantage, because we're really the only people that know it so well. And we're the only people who know how to use it for good and how to use it to amplify our voice. And so I think that when, seeing when I was like around like 14, 15, I was seeing like so much of Gen Z like using that and doing that. Like for example, kind of the gun reform movement that was happening around, I think it was like right around like 2016, that there's so many Gen Z activists using social media for amplifying their voice and amplifying, the issues that we felt that were important. And I think that really, really, really inspired me. And also, what also inspired me too was, I don't know if you guys are familiar with this platform called Rookie Magazine, but Rookie was actually, it's a very, very old online magazine that was created, like I think it was like in 2008 or 2009, but it was really, really popular because it was the first online magazine that was created by a teenager. I think it was like created by like a 14, 13-year-old. And it then became extremely popular. And I think that's just another example of the way that, teenagers just became so native to technology. And I think just seeing that and just seeing our generation really inspired me and made me feel like I am able to make a change with technology, and I am able to actually create change with just through the walls inside of my house. And so so pretty much the way that I created Cripple was I pretty much just first, I think I was really focused on like really drafting what I wanted Cripple to be and what I wanted it to look like. Then I was like, okay, so I want it to be an online platform, I want it to be an online magazine, but also want it to be a place where, we could expand into content creating and we could expand into so many other things. And so I think that was really important. And then I think the next steps were kind of just, YouTubing how to create a website and go from there. And just kind of, I really didn't, there was no, funding, there was no investments or VC from with the creation of Cripple. It was pretty much just all through, created all through my bedroom, pretty much. And so from there, it was very much a grassroots type of creation, and I pretty much just sent out a tweet and said we were looking for contributors, looking for young disabled people, and I pretty much just sent it out to all the contacts that I knew that I'd made as a reporter, and sent out to all the disability rights activists that I knew would help me share out the word. And thankfully, we were able to get a lot of response from young people all over the world. And thankfully, we were able to still create work about like 3.5 or like now 4 years later, which is pretty wild to think about. But yeah, I think like at the end of the day, I think what really empowered me was our generation and the way that we use technology. And I think that for any advice for anybody who wants to create something, I think that we absolutely have the power to do so, and that you absolutely have the power to do so, and the change that we're able to create is immeasurable.
And there are so many aspects of that answer that I really appreciated and I really would like to hit on. Like for one, Emily was talking about just like lowering the barrier to entry. Like you just started with things that she already had access to, like that was basically the internet, like, social media, like she reached out to people. I think a lot of it is just like taking initiative and just trying things, because I'm sure things didn't work out the first few tries that you tried them. The first few people probably didn't respond. So I think one, not having really a fear of like failing or fear of having like a lack of engagement at first is something really important to sort of overcome. Another thing that I think was really great that you highlighted was, again, like playing to our strengths, like what are resources that we already have available to us. So obviously technology is one, it's just a space that we're like natives in. It's definitely something that we should take advantage of. And something else I was thinking about too was like how Emily was mentioning like grassroots activism. I think one thing that I learned from my legislative meeting was a staffer from my senator was talking about how something people from like communities can do is like give public testimony in the state Congress. And so there's like this myth that like public testimonies are like pretty much useless because there's no way they're gonna change their minds anyway. But he's actually like giving examples of how public testimonies have actually changed like committee members' like perspectives on like a legislation that was almost guaranteed to pass because somebody was able to give like a really poignant or like thoughtful response on that particular bill. So I think even thinking about like what are ways that we can sort of be involved, whether it's like giving a public testimony, like reaching out to like a senator staffer, or again taking our own initiatives and sharing stories that we think are imperative to ourselves. And I think with that, this is a really great place to like open up the floor to Q&A. If anybody has any thoughts they would like to share in response to Emily, we'd love to hear it.
How can we, the able population, best represent you and the, like, I don't know, just everything? Like, because we obviously don't know your struggles, we don't know anything similar to that. What can we do to show other able people, like, this is what it's like that, and these things are not what it's like? Because I agree with you with the whole, like, the media portraying all these things. They do make it seem so tragic and so sad all the time. Like how you said, the posting on this and like, oh, these two disabled kids went to prom together is so insanely popular, and I agree, it should not be like that. It shouldn't be something crazy. You're people, and there's no difference between you and I.
Yes, exactly. Like you really hit it on the nail. Yeah, and that's a really great question. I think that at the end of the day, what I want, what I would hope for you guys to take away is that I think that one thing that and I really try to keep it in mind too is I think one thing that we can do is really make sure that to diversify our feeds on social media. So really seek out disabled creators, disabled BIPOC creators, to make sure that we're really diversifying the content that we consume and making sure, and by doing that we are kind of also ensuring that we are getting content from actual disabled people themselves, because I think that like you said, pretty much the majority of legacy media pretty much still perpetuates news stories like that. There was one news story that was pretty much published not even that long ago. I think it was 7 months ago, and we also talked about that on our website. But there was this one news story that was published by a legacy news media outlet, and it was meant to talk about meant to highlight how important it is to solve the issue of the shortage that there is of caregivers right now. And so it was going to be a really, really, really great piece, and it's a very, very important topic that really needs to be addressed. But I think the problems with that piece was that I think it was interesting because the reporter was, of course, a non-disabled reporter. And I think that the way that they were approaching the piece was they were largely interviewing the partners of the disabled person. So the partner of the disabled person was, largely, mostly the caregiver in that dynamic, and so they were pretty much all interviewing the same kind of dynamics, and it pretty much did not change. The sources were pretty much the same type of people, and so I thought that was interesting, because I thought that even though this issue is it is impacting disabled people in the disability community, the piece was still not centering disabled people in any sort of way. And so anyway, so I think that, to go back to your question, I think that something that we can all, we can do is just really make sure our feeds are diversified, and we're seeking out disabled creators and the content that they are putting out, and yeah, I think that just supporting them and supporting the disability community in general really just does a whole lot.
I feel like when I was listening to you, I have a whole page that I just kept writing question. We could switch seats if you want. So I'm going to keep just to two. The first question,
no worries,
I have to ask, who is your favorite member of One Direction?
This is a very important question. I agree. Harry Styles.
There we go. She has excellent taste. So, the more, arguably more important question. So, with social media, I suppose with a lot of, but especially with social media, obviously the way the algorithm works is you tend to get recommended things that the algorithm senses you're already going to like. So it's kind of created this thing where we have an echo chamber of you tend, it's a lot, you have to really make an effort to seek out content that you maybe wouldn't normally search up. So I guess maybe this would be a two-part question, like how can we work to ensure that people who may not think to seek out content from disabled creators ensure that they're listening and they're part of the conversation, or is that a battle that is really not important to fight, or it's not worth fighting?
No, yeah, absolutely. That is actually an incredibly important question. I think, that's a hard one. I think that is just something, honestly, that we're currently fighting against. I think that is, okay, so I guess my answer is twofold. I think that, like, the first aspect is that, largely the problem is big tech companies at the end of the day. I actually do research about this here actually at UT Austin about the way that kind of like the polarization that social media creates and like the non-diversification that social media gives you. Unfortunately, the way that algorithms work is that, algorithms favor, they put out content, the ones that they think users are going to engage with the most. So oftentimes that looks like putting out content that is like more salacious, more eye-catching, more, in order to get more users engaged. And so I think that is largely the problem, is that I think that then fosters an environment in which that, people are not really pushed to diversify their feeds because their feeds are being created for them. And these feeds are being, tailored to their interests and tailored to, which posts are getting more engagement. And so I think that is like pretty much largely the problem. I think one way that we could, really try to navigate that is not to plug Cripple back in, but I think also too is like hopefully, as we grow, as Cripple Media grows, I think that could be one way is, really making sure that our media company is able to, grow first of all, and also, able to become powerful, and that we're able to kind of create more and more content, more and more honest and representative content of the disability community, and be able to kind of, spread out beyond social media and be able to be, in more types of content beyond social media. And so hopefully, that could, widen the reach. But I would honestly encourage, like, for just more disability-led companies, for more of us, for there to be more of us, and hopefully for more, for more support so that we can be able to create more content, be able to widen our reach beyond social media. I guess I would answer that way.
So I have two questions. One of them being, where do you see your company in the next 5 to 10 years? And the second one being, what are some things we could do to make social media more accessible for people with different disabilities? Just because social media and technology is evolving. What are your plans for that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, these are great questions. So, okay, so I feel like the first question, where do I see Cripple in a couple of years? So, I guess, honestly, I don't know. It kind of does make me sad a little bit because I think, like, working in the media, unfortunately, it is a reality that the media right now is incredibly unstable, and especially for journalism. Journalism is incredibly unstable right now, and one of my little like pipe dreams when I was younger was like kind of like creating an outlet for Cripple to expand into print. However, print is, as we know, is incredibly fragile right now, and that's unfortunately also true for like younger kind of independent online platforms. And so I think my hope for the next couple of years is like, I think in general, just hope that we are able to continue creating content, and hopefully, secure, secure funding for us so that we are able to, I think my dream for Cripple is, hopefully for it to become a platform and for it to become a space where like young disabled people can come for employment opportunities and come for, for creative opportunities as well. Because I think also too is that like young people in general, like not even, just exclusively disabled people, but also young people are largely underrepresented in the media space. Like the amount of teen journalists that there are, like teen content creators or teen creatives, is pretty low and pretty small. And we are largely underpaid. And so I think that even more so exists for young disabled creatives. And so I would really hope for Cripple to become a place where, in the future, disabled people, young disabled people are able to come for us for employment opportunities and we are able to offer, enrichment and training in the media industry and be able to offer those opportunities in whatever creative endeavor that they would choose. And so yeah, I would definitely say that hopefully being able to expand, being able to secure more funding and being able to offer employment would be my goal. And why did I forget your second question? I'm so sorry. Can you repeat that?
Yeah. So I was just going to ask about, so people have different disabilities,
Oh,
right?
yes,
And
yeah.
so just talking about that, how can we make it more accessible? Like, we have captions, we can fix audio stuff, but what are some ways we make it more interactive and accessible?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, yeah. And that's a great question because I think that, another problem with social media right now is like just also how largely inaccessible it is. I think that, social media is currently inaccessible right now. I think a lot of the stuff that we're also trying to do is like really pioneer for, captions for every piece of content that we create. So we generally just push for our creators and for our followers to create like image descriptions in their captions, image descriptions. Like for example, on Instagram, there is a place where you can, when you're creating a post, you can like put in alternative text so that people with vision impairments or people with screen readers can, interact with the post, and the post will read out. Usually, their device will read out the details about the image. And so that is always really useful for a lot of people to know. So usually really pioneer for that and also for image descriptions to be included in captions as well, just in case, because sometimes that feature on Instagram can be really finicky for screen readers. So that is also there. And so yeah, I think we largely pioneer for that, for captions on all of our YouTube videos, on all of our content. And then other ways too, I definitely just think that, social media is definitely just really inaccessible in general. And I think that large part of the reason is like, lack of captions, lack of stuff like that. So I think I would definitely say like captions are always like at the forefront of our minds, and I think would probably account for like a lot of like the inaccessibilities. That makes sense.
There are a couple things I actually want to comment on to some of Emily's responses. So one of the things that the IGNITE members like brought up was like this idea of like echo chambers, which is definitely like really true. We do exist in an era where it's really easy to be like only within your own like community of people that think like you. And something I was thinking about is like there's this really interesting book. It's called Invisible Women, which basically breaks down like the gender data gap. And so the introduction of the book talks about how like our world today, our world historically has always been designed in this way of like default male thinking. Like thinking about a lot of the ways that like policy is created, or a lot of the ways like even buildings or cars are all designed. It's all designed with statistics and like data of like men. Like so, even for example, like a car, they're tested on dummies that are around like 6 foot with like builds of adult men. And so if you compare like the statistics of like injuries from like a car crash between like men and women, like women are actually much more likely to die in a car accident simply because of like the data that those cars were like designed on, and the fact that there wasn't really any inclusive design while we were developing that car. And I think this like gap of like not having inclusive or universal design can be seen across like again like every industry. So like automotives are just like one example. Even like accessible design within like social media is something that's really important to hit. So I think again this concept of like universal design is really important to hit on, whether it's like for women, whether it's like the disabled community, or whatever it is. There are like so many gaps that continue to exist and perpetuate that really should be served by always having like universal and inclusive design at the forefront. Something else that I wanted to hit on as well was this concept of like independent creators. So like one of the comparisons that I always think about is like, for example, like government, which is like very systemic, versus like independent like creations or like independent like grassroots organizations. Of course, like you can never truly compare the two because like both have completely different functions. But it just reminds me of like what are some ways people can have ownership over, again, creating change, like impacting their communities. It doesn't always have to be government or legislative change. Of course, that's really imperative, but I think it's also really important to look at like other avenues of being able to create impact. And again, it also reminds me of the comparison between, of course, like large, really established corporations versus like independent creators like yourself who chose to like create Cripple Media.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, that is so, yeah. Yeah, I mean, just to really like drive it home, I think that, yeah, I think like at the end of the day, what we really want to push forward is the support of like independent creators. And one thing, that, you guys can do and I can do, and pretty much anyone with like, with social media is that, we can absolutely, create change just by supporting independent creators or just by, diversifying our feeds and stuff like that. And yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that, that is something that, can go a long way.
You're obviously a young voice in a field that's dominated by older people. You mentioned this, but is there any advice you have, or I guess it goes without saying, you have those older voices that kind of feel entitled to be like, I'm this authority figure. And as young people, I feel like there's this point in life where we have to figure out that, oh, we have this agency to like put ourselves forward, to like, speak for ourselves, like we deserve the same respect. Any advice for people who still feel daunted like myself? Like when you're in like these kind of situations, you kind of have to like remind yourself, oh, I'm just as equal as them. Any advice for that?
Yeah, absolutely. Oh my God, yeah, that is such a good question. I feel like that is something that like so many young people, like I feel like all of us, like we kind of like feel that in some capacity, either when we're advocating or we're just starting in activism or we want to create change. I mean, a lot of the spaces, like not even in not only in the media industry, but so many adjacent or so many other industries are like pretty much run by older people. So I think that one thing that this also kind of goes hand in hand with imposter syndrome a little bit. But I think that even now, or like a couple of years later, Cripple Media is like more established, and we have been able to, secure a lot of like support, and we've been able to be featured in, a lot of like really cool news outlets. I think at the end of the day, I still feel nervous, when, like talking to like media executives or media industries, people or leaders in media industries. And I think that like one way that, we can remind ourselves, or like I feel like this kind of helps me to remind myself, but like I think that once, we start creating change, we like, we indelibly like, catch people's attention. And I think that like we, that then, creates, change, and it creates so much impact just by using their voice. And I think that a lot of like, older people and a lot of people who are in those positions of power take that very seriously. I think that, when they see like young people, of course, like this is coming from, older people who, are open to listening and who are open to understanding, but I think that a lot of, like leaders and executives are, do take that seriously and do, take, when they see like, young people, succeeding or like creating change. I think that is kind of, that's like enough of a statement. I feel like I think once we're able to get into these spaces and break open these doors, I think that our presence and just our our being able to be visible in these rooms, I think is what kind of demands our our agency. I guess if that makes sense.
Thank you so much for that closing, Emily. And guys, thank you so much for
Thank you guys. This was like so incredibly awesome and so